Hi everyone, I'm Harry Ennie, and welcome to Crime Enigma. In October 2021, a time often associated with the warm hues of autumn and romantic getaways, a young couple, Joseph and Emily Ferlazzo, embarked on a trip to the picturesque rural landscapes of Vermont. Their purpose was a joyous one to celebrate their one-year wedding anniversary. They were traveling in their converted camper van, a vehicle they had poured their efforts into and affectionately named Roaming Rosie, envisioning a trip filled with cherished memories, hiking, and family time. But what began as a seemingly idyllic vacation, a carefully planned escape that included members of Joseph's family, would soon curdle into an unimaginable and brutal nightmare. This anniversary trip took a deeply sinister and irrevocable turn when, on the second day, Joseph appeared for breakfast with his concerned family, but without his young wife, Emily, by his side. She wasn't seen for the entire day. When his family members, increasingly worried, inquired about her whereabouts, Joseph offered vague, inconsistent, and dismissive explanations. She wasn't feeling well, or they had merely had a little fight. But back in the confines of Roaming Rosie, their supposed home on wheels, something truly awful, something irretrievably horrific, had already occurred. An argument, far from little, had escalated with deadly finality, ending in the worst way imaginable. It left behind a missing wife, a camper van now tainted by an unspeakable act of violence, and ultimately, 8 ominous, heavy trash bags. This is the horrifying case of Joseph Ferlazzo and the tragic, brutal murder of his 22-year-old wife, Emily. Joseph Ferlazzo and Emily Pruitt began their relationship in the early, uncertain, and often isolating stages of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Emily was just 20 years old at the time, a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, while Joseph was considerably older, at 40. Born in July 1999, Emily was a New Hampshire native, described by those who knew her as a vibrant individual with a bright future seemingly stretching out before her. Her own mother was still a freshman in college when Emily was born, a testament to her mother's determination to provide her daughter with a good and stable life despite early challenges. Emily, who had 5 half-siblings, possessed a remarkable and infectious verve for life. She had a deep love for all things creative, but her true focus, her undeniable passion, was for caring for other people. This compassionate and empathetic drive initially led her to enroll in esthetician school. However, she soon decided that her ambitions to help others would be best and more directly served by pursuing a demanding career in nursing. She started as a licensed nursing assistant in her home state of New Hampshire, and this was her profession when her path fatefully crossed with that of Joseph Ferlazzo. Joseph Ferlazzo was born in Pennsylvania. He trained and worked as a tattoo artist, a profession that often carries with it a certain artistic, unconventional, and free-spirited allure. He had moved to Vermont in 2012. His very first encounter with Emily was reportedly in 2018 when she was only 19 years old. At that particular time, Joseph was teaching one of Emily's friends, a young woman named Lauren, the intricate art of body piercing. Lauren, being a somewhat nervous novice piercer, was advised by Joseph to practice her skills on someone she knew well and was comfortable with as a starting point. So, Lauren brought her friend Emily into the tattoo parlor. Joseph later recounted in an interview that when Emily left the parlor that day, he made a comment to Lauren, saying that her friend Emily was something special, even going as far as to jokingly, or perhaps prophetically, remark that he wouldn't mind making her his next ex-wife. Despite this initial impression, they didn't begin dating immediately after this first meeting. Emily was reportedly seeing someone else at the time, and Joseph himself moved to Maine for about a year shortly thereafter. But when he returned to Vermont in 2020, he made a point to reconnect with Emily. He gave her a tattoo, and they started spending time together regularly. According to Joseph's account, Emily had just broken up with her previous boyfriend at this time, had recently dyed her hair a different color, and was, in his words, extremely flirty. a flirtation to which he was admittedly receptive. He soon invited her for a motorcycle ride to tour some of Vermont's famously scenic landscapes. Perhaps Emily, young and impressionable, was attracted to Joseph's perceived creativity as an established tattoo artist, or maybe his somewhat older, bad boy persona held a certain undeniable appeal for her. He was, after all, significantly older than her, a man of 40 to her 20, and by his own later admission, he couldn't offer her much, if anything, in the way of conventional financial security. When they first reconnected and began their relationship, he was reportedly bouncing around friends' couches, a transient existence, as rent in Vermont can be notoriously expensive. He acknowledged at the time that he needed to get his finances secure in order to regain his personal independence. Emily, at this point in her life, was still officially living in her parents' house in New Hampshire, but spent a considerable amount of her time visiting her friends in Vermont, enjoying a degree of freedom. She seemingly had the best of both worlds, the underlying stability and support of her parents' home, combined with an active and engaging social life with her friends in Vermont. To Joseph, Emily, with her family support system and her own income as a nursing assistant, may well have represented an attractive degree of financial security and stability that he himself lacked. Soon, the couple became official, their relationship progressing at a remarkably rapid pace. By the end of that summer of 2020, after only a few months of dating, they were engaged. Joseph stated that by this time, there was finally enough money in his bank account to afford the necessary first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit, and they found an apartment together. Emily, it was always understood by those around them, could always fall back on her parents for support if all else failed. But this whirlwind relationship, characterized by its significant age difference and its rapid progression to engagement, wasn't without its critics and detractors. When they announced their engagement in September 2020, Emily shared a somewhat defensive and telling post on her Facebook page, seemingly addressing negative comments that people often make about others' engagements and significant life choices. The post urged people to simply learn how to say congratulations and nothing more, decrying unsolicited critical advice or judgmental comparisons to their own experiences. She tellingly added a personal comment to this public post that read, "At everyone," strongly implying that she and Joseph had indeed been receiving a fair amount of criticism and unsolicited opinions about their engagement. He was, after all, twice her age, and their courtship had been exceptionally brief. It was perhaps unsurprising that some of her friends and certain relatives had reservations and had likely voiced their concerns to her directly. But Emily, seemingly headstrong and deeply in love, or perhaps determined to prove her critics wrong, ignored them. In October 2020, just a month after their engagement, she married Joseph Ferlazzo. Together, the newly married Joseph and Emily embarked on an ambitious new project. They bought an old, disused bus and started the challenging task of refurbishing it from scratch, hoping to convert it into a livable space, a fully functional camper van that would serve as their home, their roaming Rosie. Early in 2021, they made the decision to move the bus onto Emily's parents' property in New Hampshire. This move was ostensibly intended to help them save money on rent while they continued to work on the van and their financial situation. It may also have been a way for Emily to have more readily available support from her family in navigating the complexities of her new marriage, which, according to later accounts from her mother, was not turning out to be the blissful and harmonious union she had likely hoped for when she said, "I do." Around New Year's Eve of that year, just a couple of months into their marriage, Emily had expressed her struggles and considerable distress to her mom during a late-night, tearful phone call. Her mother, Pam, later recounted that Emily called her near midnight, stating that she had been in a significant fight with Joseph, that he had physically pushed her during the altercation, and that Emily was crying and upset. Emily's mother also later testified to observing unexplained physical marks on her daughter's body on other occasions. She described gouges down Emily's chest, which Emily had unconvincingly attributed to their dog, and a distinct handprint-shaped bruise on the back of her arm, the origin of which Emily had steadfastly refused to disclose to her concerned mother. Her mother was, quite naturally, deeply worried for Emily's safety, but hesitated to intercede too directly or forcefully in her daughter's marriage, fearing, as many parents do, that it might inadvertently exacerbate the situation or alienate Emily further. Having the young couple come to live in the camper van on Emily's parents' property in New Hampshire seemed, at the time, like the safest and most practical solution, a way for her parents to keep a closer, albeit still indirect, eye on Joseph's behavior and Emily's well-being. This domestic arrangement, however, offered no such protective oversight when Joseph and Emily traveled alone together to Vermont for their anniversary. Bolton, Vermont, a small town with a population of around 1,300, is primarily known as a picturesque ski resort destination, nestled comfortably in the scenic foothills of the majestic Green Mountains, surrounded by dense, verdant forests and idyllic, rolling valleys. It's the kind of place that seems like an ideal vacation spot for an outdoorsy couple seeking a tranquil and romantic escape from the everyday. But this particular trip was to be far from an ideal, or tranquil, vacation for Joseph and Emily Ferlazzo. Emily reportedly seemed unusually nervous and apprehensive about going away alone on this trip with her husband. Her mother later observed that while Emily expressed excitement about seeing her sister-in-law, Joseph's sister, Nicole, who was also going to be in Vermont, she seemed to be taking an uncharacteristically long time to get the bus ready for the journey, an uncharacteristic procrastination that hinted at an underlying reluctance or unease. Far from being happy, carefree recent newlyweds embarking on a joyous celebratory trip, Joseph and Emily apparently went to Vermont as a couple already teetering perilously close to a breaking point, reportedly stressed about their precarious financial situation, arguing constantly and grappling with deeply divisive issues of jealousy and trust. A significant point of contention was Joseph's apparent past involvement in polyamorous relationships before marrying Emily, and his more recent expressions of a desire to open their marriage again, a suggestion that likely clashed profoundly with Emily's expectations of monogamy. Given this volatile mix of stressors and unresolved conflicts, something, it seemed in retrospect, was almost bound to go catastrophically wrong. But Emily couldn't possibly have imagined, in her worst nightmares, just how terribly and irrevocably wrong things were about to turn. Joseph's sister, Nicole, and her boyfriend, Ariel, also came on the trip to Vermont that weekend. They were staying in an Airbnb rental in Bolton, ostensibly to celebrate Ariel's birthday, as well as Emily and Joseph's first wedding anniversary. Both couples arrived in the town of Bolton on Friday, October 15th, 2021, with plans to leave again on Sunday after what they hoped would be a pleasant weekend spent rambling through the autumn foliage, hiking scenic trails, enjoying good food, and soaking in the tranquil Vermont surroundings. Nicole, Joseph's sister, was naturally curious about her brother's young wife and invited Joseph and Emily to come over to their Airbnb on that first Friday night to spend some time together. However, late that evening, Joseph sent Nicole a text message abruptly canceling their plans, offering no clear or convincing explanation for the change. Perhaps something was already seriously amiss between the couple, or maybe they were simply tired after their long journey up from New Hampshire. According to Joseph Ferlazzo's later trial testimony, instead of going inside the Airbnb and spending time with his sister and her boyfriend that Friday night as planned, he and Emily remained in their camper van and became embroiled in a fierce and ultimately fatal argument. They argued, he claimed, because he had, perhaps insensitively, brought Emily on their first anniversary trip to the very same condominium complex where his ex-wife coincidentally lived or was staying. They also argued, he stated under oath, because he seemed to believe, even after marrying Emily, that he had no inherent obligation to be monogamous with his wife, to be sexually faithful to her, a stance that likely devastated Emily. During this intense and emotionally charged argument, Emily reportedly told him in no uncertain terms that she was done with the relationship, that she did not want to be with him any longer, that she could not endure the situation anymore, and that she wanted to leave him for good. Despite this alleged tumultuous and relationship-ending night, Joseph Ferlazzo behaved with an almost preternatural and deeply unsettling normalcy on the following morning, Saturday. He greeted his sister Nicole with a cheerful text message, saying, "I just made some coffee. I can bring you some." He then went over to her Airbnb and even took a shower there. They all subsequently went out to breakfast together. When his sister Nicole inevitably asked where Emily was, Joseph casually and dismissively replied that she was still sleeping in the van. They proceeded to have breakfast. Joseph ate heartily and even drank a mimosa, showing no outward signs of distress or concern. They then made plans to drive to the nearby town of St. Albans later that day, where another friend of his lived. After breakfast, back at the Airbnb, he even gave his sister a tattoo. The way Joseph initially described this fight to his sister and her boyfriend made it sound dramatic, certainly with potentially catastrophic implications for their young marriage, but not necessarily physically violent. Heated arguments, it unfortunately seemed, had become a distressingly normal occurrence for Joseph and Emily. What wasn't normal, according to Joseph's initial story to his sister, was that Emily had supposedly stormed off and run away after their argument the previous night. Joseph appeared emotionally distant and somewhat out of it throughout that entire Saturday, a demeanor which Nicole understandably attributed to the fight with Emily and his presumed worry over his missing wife and the precarious state of their very recent marriage. That evening, Joseph moved the camper van, roaming Rosie from Bolton to a friend's property in nearby St. Albans. He, his sister Nicole, and her boyfriend Ariel then went to a party at that location. There was still no sign of Emily, and Joseph offered no further updates on her supposed whereabouts. Also present at this party, by sheer coincidence, was an off-duty local police officer. She later testified at Joseph's trial that nothing about his demeanor during the several hours they spent chatting around a campfire struck her as particularly out of the ordinary or suspicious. He was, in her observation, relaxed, casually engaged in conversation about various topics including their respective jobs and his ongoing camper van renovation project, and he even smoked marijuana from a bong in her presence. He mentioned that he was a tattoo artist. It didn't seem to bother him in the slightest that she was a member of law enforcement. From all outward appearances, everything was fine, and he had done nothing wrong. The only thing that seemed slightly strange to the officer, only in retrospect after Emily was reported missing, was that Joseph didn't mention Emily at all during their lengthy and varied conversation, not until the very end of the evening, around midnight, as they were all preparing to retire for the night. As they were parting ways, Joseph made a single, fleeting comment related to something Emily apparently liked. The officer then remarked to her friend, Alex, that she hadn't even realized Joseph had a wife, as he hadn't spoken about her at all in the preceding 4 hours of conversation. Nor had he mentioned that his wife had supposedly walked off on Saturday after an argument and that he hadn't heard from her since. It was, in hindsight, as if Emily, for that entire period, simply didn't exist in Joseph's narrative of his life. The prosecution at Joseph Ferlazzo's trial would later highlight his chilling and duplicitous behavior during this period while Emily's lifeless body lay mere feet away from him, concealed inside their camper van. He had the audacity to send her phone another text message, feigning concern and frustration. "This is far enough. Get your ass home. I gotta go back to New Hampshire. Are you coming back?" On Sunday, the family members, including Joseph, parted ways, leaving Vermont. Joseph drove back to Emily's parents' property in New Hampshire, where he and Emily had been living together in the camper van. He notably, and suspiciously, left roaming Rosie behind at his friend's place in St. Albans, choosing instead to ride his motorcycle back to New Hampshire alone. When he arrived at Emily's parents' home, he told Emily's concerned mother a story similar in some respects to what he had initially told his sister Nicole, that he and Emily had gotten into an argument in a parking lot on Saturday. But he added a new and self-serving detail for Emily's mother. He claimed their argument had gotten physical. He alleged that he had tried to stop Emily from leaving their van, and then she, Emily, had kicked him in the groin. He further alleged that he'd then left the scene to go to a nearby store, and Emily had told him at that point that she was getting an Uber to take her back to New Hampshire. According to Joseph's evolving account to Emily's distraught family, this was the last time he had seen her, and he had been expecting to find her already back at her parents' place when he arrived. But Emily's parents, particularly her mother, Pam, weren't entirely convinced by his story. Emily's mother later testified that when Joseph arrived, he was visibly shaking, an observation she initially and charitably attributed to him being cold from the long motorcycle ride from Vermont. When she pressed him on the whereabouts of the camper van, Joseph gave her two different, conflicting answers as to its location. Crucially, he had not called the police at any point to report Emily missing. Deeply concerned by Joseph's inconsistent story and Emily's continued absence, Emily's parents, David and Michelle Bass, Emily's mother and stepfather, contacted the Vermont State Police to report their daughter missing. When a Vermont state trooper subsequently contacted Joseph Ferlazzo by phone regarding Emily's disappearance, Joseph initially sounded confused and evasive. He then whispered to the trooper that Emily had indeed said she was going to get an Uber, that he had dropped her off at a parking lot at her request, had subsequently looked for her but couldn't find her, and hadn't been able to make any contact with her since. What Joseph Ferlazzo did next, however, betrayed a deeply guilty conscience and set in motion his eventual capture. Emily hadn't just disappeared. He had done something terrible to her, and now he was desperately and clumsily trying to cover it up. That same night, after speaking with the police, Joseph turned up unexpectedly at his friend Spencer Lemons' house. He wanted Spencer to drive him all the way back to St. Albans, Vermont, to pick up the camper van. But when they arrived at the property in St. Albans, where Roaming's Rosie was parked, they found it already surrounded by Vermont State Police vehicles, their flashing blue and red lights cutting through the darkness. Joseph knew, in that instant, what the police would inevitably find inside Roaming Rosie. When he saw the significant police presence, he understandably panicked and urgently told Spencer to just drive away, to go down a nearby dead-end road, turn around, and then drive quickly past the police cordon again. Spencer Lemons, though initially trying to be a good friend, wasn't about to knowingly let Joseph get away with whatever serious crime he had evidently committed. He stopped the car and demanded to know what was truly going on. Joseph evasively replied, "There's a lot going on. I wish I could see my grandmother." Spencer pressed him again, more forcefully. "What is going on?" Joseph then uttered the chilling and unambiguous words, "Emily is back in the van." Spencer, his blood running cold, asked the inevitable question, "Is Emily alive?" Joseph quietly and devastatingly said, "No." Spencer then asked, his voice likely trembling, "Did you hurt her?" Joseph admitted, simply, "Yes." Just then, Spencer Lemons realized the horrifying and terrifying truth. He had a confessed murderer riding shotgun in his car. Scared for his own life, he immediately told Joseph to get out of his car, and as soon as Joseph complied, Spencer phoned the police, bravely reporting that Joseph had just confessed that his wife, Emily, was dead, and inside the camper van that police were currently surrounding. Inside Roaming Rosie, police investigators found a scene of unimaginable horror. There were 8 heavy, dark-colored garbage bags. Those garbage bags contained human remains, the dismembered body of Emily Ferlazzo. They also found a Glock handgun concealed underneath the pillows on the bed in the van, along with ammunition and a silencer stored in a nearby basket. In a butcher's block in the small kitchen area, there was a blood-stained knife. There was a significant amount of blood found on the mattress and also on the wood underneath it where it had been laying, suggesting that someone had deliberately turned the mattress over in an attempt to hide the extensive blood stain. Similar bloody stains were found in the camper van's tiny shower stall, alongside a telltale bottle of bleach and other cleaning materials. All of this constituted horrifying and overwhelming physical evidence that proved a brutal murder had indeed taken place inside the confines of the converted bus, and that the killer had then made a concerted, if ultimately futile and gruesome, effort to cover up his heinous crime. 14 long hours later, at around 2:00 p.m. on October 19th, an alert off-duty Vermont State Police officer, the very same officer who had coincidentally spoken with Joseph at the party in St. Albans just 2 nights before, spotted him at a local gas station convenience store where she just happened to be buying her lunch. She recognized him instantly from the numerous photos that had been circulated in a police press release she had proofread earlier that same morning. She cautiously approached him. Joseph initially kept walking, seemingly ignoring her. But when she identified herself clearly as state police and asked him to stop for a second as she just needed to talk to him, he complied. He stopped, turned around, and then took a very long, almost exaggeratedly slow drink from his energy drink, just looking at her with what she described as the proverbial deer in the headlight look. It seemed to her, based on her training and experience as a law enforcement officer, that he was almost visibly trying to figure out his next move: fight, flight, or freeze. When the officer asked him if he was Joseph and if he was okay, his body language seemed to deflate completely, and he quietly replied, "No, I'm not okay." When she informed him that a lot of people were looking for him and looking for Emily, and that Emily's family was very worried about her, Joseph Ferlazzo simply and chillingly replied, "Let's go." He was taken into custody without further incident and agreed to an interview with investigators almost immediately. He had been effectively on the run for approximately 14 hours, more than enough time to potentially plan out what he might say if he were caught. He began his confession to the investigators almost immediately upon being questioned, stating with a disturbing lack of overt emotion, "I fucked up, plain and simple, and did something that I cannot undo." He then went on to claim, in this initial version of events, that as soon as he had put their vehicle in park on that fateful Friday night in Bolton, his wife, Emily, had suddenly and inexplicably went completely berserk, completely psychotic, and I shot her. He attempted to paint a picture for the detectives of a romantic anniversary weekend that had gone horribly and tragically wrong, primarily in his telling, due to the supposed ingratitude and mental instability of his young wife. He further suggested that he hadn't really known what he was doing when he picked up the gun, that something inside his head had just snapped, that he remembered feeling really warm and worried, and that something inside me said enough is enough. The prosecution at Joseph Ferlazzo's subsequent trial, however, presented a very different and far more damning narrative of the events leading up to Emily's death. They argued that Joseph, instead of simply walking away from the argument with Emily that night, as any reasonable person might have done, had instead deliberately and methodically executed a plan to kill her. He had gotten up from the couch in the van. He had gone to the closet area. He had retrieved his Glock 19 pistol, to which he had already affixed a silencer. He had then walked over to the bed where Emily was lying, her head resting on a pillow. He had picked up a nearby throw pillow from the couch, jumped onto the bed, callously put this throw pillow over Emily's face, and then shot her twice at point-blank range, directly into the left side of her head, killing her instantly. Both of those bullets, the evidence showed, exited her skull on the right side of her head and came to rest inside the very pillow her head had been laying on. The evidence presented at trial The prosecution argued, clearly showed that Emily posed absolutely no physical threat whatsoever to Mr. Ferlazzo at the time he killed her. His later story, developed for trial, that she had a gun and was threatening him, was directly and unequivocally contradicted by the fact that both of the pistols found in the van belonged to him. Emily did not own a gun. His initial story to police, that he remembered Emily's body falling after he killed her, was also directly contradicted by the physical and forensic evidence, which indicated that her head was, in fact, resting on something, the pillow, when she was shot. The prosecution detailed Joseph's chilling actions immediately following the murder, rather than calling 911 or any other police agency, or his ex-wife, or even his own sister, Nicole, who was just yards away from him in her Airbnb rental at the time. Mr. Ferlazzo instead chose to shut off Emily's cell phone because, in his own chilling and recorded words to police, he wasn't going to use it and she wasn't going to use it. After he shut off her phone, effectively silencing her even in death, Mr. Ferlazzo, a man described as 6 feet tall and weighing 200 pounds, used his considerable strength to carry Emily's small, 130-pound body into the tiny shower stall of their camper van. He then meticulously bagged up the bloody pillow from the bed, the red throw pillow he had used to muffle the shots, the bloody pillowcase, and the blood-soaked bed sheet. He then gathered Emily's shoes, her glasses, her wallet, and her now silent phone, placing them all in a plastic grocery bag, but was careful, the prosecution noted, to keep her identification card. He then proceeded to remake the bed with new, clean sheets, a new blanket, and new pillows, effectively erasing the immediate signs of the violence that had just occurred there. Then, with an almost unimaginable coldness and detachment, he got back into the very bed where he had just murdered his wife. And just a few short hours later, at 7:48 a.m. on Saturday morning, while his murdered wife's body was still lying in his shower mere feet away, he casually texted his sister, "Nicole, I can't sleep. Any interest in going for breakfast?" He even made a cheerful recommendation on where they should go. "Maxie's has really good breakfast!" Exclamation point. "I just French pressed some coffee. Have you had coffee yet?" And off they went to Maxie's, where Mr. Ferlazzo calmly ate eggs and drank a mimosa. He then drove their camper van, still containing Emily's body, from Bolton to St. Albans, parked the van on the property of his best friend, and rather than telling them the horrific truth that Emily was dead inside the van, that he had killed her, or even his later self-serving claim that he had to kill her, he simply told them that Emily had took off after an argument. He then set up his tattoo equipment in their home and calmly started to give his sister, Nicole, a tattoo, but not before sending Emily's phone another manipulative text message. "Whatever. Exclamation point and angry face. I'm going to spend time with Nikki while I can. Exclamation point. Call me." 3 hours later, he finished his sister's tattoo, and an hour after that, he went out to eat again, this time at Twig's, a gastropub in St. Albans. He ate dinner, he had drinks, and he got a ride back to his friend's residence. And he again slept in the van, with Emily's body still in the shower. The next day, Sunday, he went out to Burlington with his sister. He got coffee, and again he went out to eat, and again he said absolutely nothing to Nicole or anyone else about what he had done to Emily. After gallivanting around downtown Burlington, he headed back to St. Albans, and on his way, he made a calculated stop at a Hannaford supermarket to purchase bleach, because, the prosecution argued, despite him continuing with his life as if absolutely nothing horrific had happened, he did, in fact, have a very significant and gruesome mess to clean up. And amongst all of this chillingly mundane and deliberately deceptive activities, he apparently decided that he needed to make Emily's body easier to carry, easier to move, and ultimately, easier to discard. Mr. Ferlazzo, using a serrated saw and at least 3 different knives he had in the camper, proceeded to dismember his wife's body, cutting off her arms, her legs, her feet, and eventually, her head. The same torso was also found to be absolutely riddled with stab wounds, 18 in total, including one that struck her heart, all inflicted after she was already dead. He then callously placed each piece of her violated body into separate, heavy-duty garbage bags. And then on Monday morning, before finally leaving Vermont to drive back to New Hampshire to retrieve his Jeep, a vehicle which he later told police he needed in order to bury Emily's dismembered body parts somewhere in the woods. He just couldn't help himself. Knowing full well exactly where Emily was, and exactly what unspeakable things he had done to her, he contemptuously texted her phone one last, hateful time. "You're an asshole. I don't deserve this shit." Despite his detailed initial confession to the police about shooting Emily, Joseph Ferlazzo did not take a guilty plea when formally charged. So, in December, the source text again states 2024, which appears to be a typo for a trial following an Oct 2021 crime. The narrative will proceed assuming a trial occurred. Joseph Ferlazzo was brought to trial in Vermont on the charge of first-degree murder. There, in front of a jury, his story changed dramatically and fundamentally. He didn't deny that he had killed Emily, but now, for the first time, he was claiming it was an act of self-defense, completely contradicting what he had originally told police in his recorded interview. He now stated under oath that Emily had been the aggressor, that she had been attacking him physically when he went for his gun. He testified that he swatted her with a throw pillow and said, "Stop hitting me." That's when, he claimed, Emily escalated, allegedly saying, "That's it, you're dead," and then threw her arm under her pillow and pulled her hand out with her Taurus pistol. He described feeling horrified and terrified, stating, "As soon as I saw that, I just felt like this wave of heat, just like red hot. I was holding my Glock and she started just coming up at me, and I just fired. She was going to shoot me." He further claimed that Emily had a history of attacking him whenever she got jealous about his friends, or due to his non-monogamous past and their conflicting views on the matter. He even alleged that her jealousy and supposed propensity for violence led to physical abuse against him, claiming she would go through his phone and then respond by beating on me. Joseph also attempted to paint a picture of his own troubled past, stating he came from a violent background where his mother had frequently beaten him with a clothes hanger as a child, which, according to him, had unfortunately led him into a series of toxic relationships with aggressive and physically abusive women as an adult, with Emily supposedly being just the latest part of this unfortunate trend. He claimed Emily wasn't a gentle person, had even kicked his dog on occasion, and that he had suggested they see a couples therapist because he was genuinely scared for the safety of a potential child if her alleged violent behavior continued. He testified that they had frequently considered divorce, with both of them initiating the idea at different times, primarily, he claimed, due to arguments over her financial irresponsibility. He insisted he never responded with violence when she supposedly attacked him, not until that fateful anniversary trip. His new self-defense narrative culminated in the claim that on that night, believing she was about to shoot him, he had to shoot her with a Glock that was already, conveniently, in his hand in order to save his own life. This, he told the jury, was what he now remembered happening, a stark departure from his initial, detailed confession to police. The prosecution, however, argued that this self-defense claim was a desperate fabrication. They contended that this case, this horrific crime, was about one thing and one thing only: Joseph Ferlazzo's massive, controlling ego. His nearly 42-year-old ego, they asserted, was simply unable to accept his much younger, 22-year-old wife disrespecting him, challenging him, or, most significantly, wanting to leave him. This same inflated ego, the prosecution argued, believed it was his inherent right to cheat on Emily, to have relationships with other women, whether she liked it or not. An ego so pathologically inflated that even after shooting his wife in the head 2 times, then brutally stabbing and dismembering her body, bagging her up and planning to discard her like common trash, he didn't even tell his own sister what had happened because, by his own admission, he didn't want to make a bad impression with her boyfriend, or because he had supposedly promised Nicole not to, quote, dump his drama on her. He considered the act of murdering his wife to be mere drama, an ego so grotesquely inflated that after taking her life, ending her future simply because he didn't like the things she was saying to him, because she expressed her fundamental human right to no longer want to be with him, he had the unmitigated gall to call her an asshole. The state submitted forcefully and unequivocally to the jury that it was Emily, and only Emily, who did not deserve any of this. All of the credible evidence presented by the state during the lengthy trial, the witness statements, the undeniable physical evidence from the camper van, the detailed forensic evidence, was checked, verified, and pointed, beyond any reasonable doubt, to Joseph Ferlazzo's guilt. It also emerged during the legal proceedings that this might not have been Joseph's first violent assault on a much younger woman. He had been accused of a similar violent incident in 2018 by another woman who claimed he had also drugged her and threatened to kill her after only a few dates. While no criminal case was filed in that instance, due to a perceived lack of sufficient evidence at the time, if her story was true, it suggested a deeply disturbing pattern of predatory behavior. The post-mortem examination of Emily Ferlazzo revealed the true horror of her final moments and the subsequent desecration of her body. She had been shot twice in the head and then, with chilling post-mortem brutality, stabbed 18 times after she was already dead. Joseph had claimed to police that he and Emily had been drinking heavily on the Friday night before the murder, perhaps as a mitigating factor for his actions. However, the toxicology report showed absolutely no alcohol in Emily's system at the time of her death. He had also spent the next few days sending deceptive text messages to her phone, as if she were still alive and merely missing, even though he later claimed during his trial, when pressed by the prosecutor on his memory of the dismemberment, that he had no clear memory except for a vague, nightmarish recollection of cutting into her leg with a knife and being sick over it. The prosecutor sharply corrected him, pointing out that he hadn't just cut into her leg with a knife. He had systematically cut into her leg with a serrated saw. His account at trial was confused, deeply contradictory, and filled with self-serving, inserted moments where he attempted to express guilt and profound sorrow. All the emotions that might seem appropriate for someone who had tragically killed the person they professed to love in a desperate act to save their own life. But the Vermont jury was not taken in by his performance. After 5 hours of deliberation, which included listening to a 50-minute playback of Joseph Ferlazzo's own trial testimony, they convicted him of first-degree murder, thereby unequivocally rejecting his belated and unsubstantiated claim of self-defense. The jury also could have considered 2 lesser charges instead, second-degree murder or voluntary manslaughter, but they chose neither, finding him guilty of the most serious crime, indicating their belief in his premeditation and malice. In Vermont, a conviction for first-degree murder carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 35 years. Joseph Ferlazzo now sits in jail, awaiting his final sentencing, while Emily's grieving family continues to mourn for a vibrant young life, so full of promise, so tragically and brutally stolen by an act of unimaginable domestic violence.